Hello guys, I welcome you all to the second session of the cryptography lecture series. In the earlier session, I explained about the history of cryptography and I listed down the main objectives of cryptography. Further, I explained about public as well as private keys used in cryptography. I just sorted down few types of cryptography, among which I just explained Julius Caesar's shift cipher method in the earlier session. In this session, I am going to deal with pig-pen cipher. So what do you mean by pig-pen cipher? Before going into this method, let me just brief the history of this method. This method remains so unique even after 5 or 6 centuries. The main reason is, in most of the methods, we either use alphabets or numbers or combination of these two. So that we call it as mono-alphabetic substitution cipher. Whereas pig-pen method is so unique because it's used geometric. So precisely I can say pig-pen cipher is nothing but a geometric simple substitution cipher. So it uses symbols or geometric shapes or geometric notations as a substitution for other text. So this is called as a combination of grids and X. Meantime, this method can be easily grasped even by a kid because this deals with pictures. So let me just get into this method. So the history says that pig-pen cipher method was evolved somewhere between 15th and 16th centuries. Pig-pen cipher method was invented by a person named Freemason, and few historical writers claim that this person should have been a mason because this method involves fragmentation of grids. So somewhere a mason could have been used his work as a theory, and that's where pig-pen cipher should have been evolved. So that's what few writers claim. And even history says that George Washington's army also used this sort of method during their American Civil War. Right. So let me just explain this method. This method is so simple. Let me just get into the method. We have 26 alphabets in English. So for each alphabet, we are substituting one geometrical representation, and using that, we are going to convert the plain text into cipher text. So we'll just look into this. There are few other similar kind of methods also available. Now we are going to discuss something called grid XX. So what do you mean by grid XX? First of all, we are going to draw a grid consisting of 9 cells. So I have a grid consisting of 9 cells. So in each cell, I am having alphabets from A to I. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H and I. Similarly, I am having another grid. So in this grid also I am having another set of 9 letters starting from J to R. But from the earlier grid, this grid is a bit different because each cell consists of alphabets along with dot representations. So you can just find J dot, K dot, L dot. Similarly, letters from J to R have been fitted into this grid. So now 9 plus 9, 18 letters have been covered. So now we have an additional 8 more letters. So what people do is they are representing 2 more X. So one X is simply an X and another X along with dots. So grid and XX. This is simply a grid. This is a grid with each cells consisting of dots. This is simply an X. This is simply an X with each edges consisting of its dots. So here S, T, U, V have to be fitted in. Right? So S, T, more importantly, it's not going in an anti-clockwise direction. S, T and jump to the opposite, then come down. So S, T, U, V. Similarly, W, X, Y, Z. The only thing is, along with the alphabets, it should accompany a single dot. So that's how we are framing all the 26 English alphabets. Right? So how to convert the plain text into cipher text? It is so easy. So for each alphabet, you look into its position and you just draw only the cell representation in a geometric structure. So you just get into it. So I have a simple example. I have something called hello. I have to use pig-pen cipher method to convert this plain text into a cipher text. So what should I do? I should just first plot this each and every alphabet in our either grid or in X, and based on the position of the alphabet, I have to represent that with its geometric shape. So H. So I can identify H here. So I can just draw its geometric structure. Next is E. So I can just search for E. So I can just draw the representation of E in geometrical notation. Right? Similarly, I have double L. So I can go for L. Now L is here. So again, I should just draw something like a right angle along with a dot. Finally, I have to go for O. So O is somewhere here. Something like an open-ended square bracket along with a dot. So that's how every alphabet is being converted into its geometric structure. So this method is pick pen cipher method, and it is so easy. The only thing is, if Alice has to send some text to Bob, they should always have this clear with them. Either they should use grid XX method. So this is grid XX method. There are other few other methods also available. They can just use the combination as grid X. So what should be grid X? After this grid, I should have an X. So there I'll have 4 letters. And remaining should be again a grid format. The remaining should be again an X format. So that can be a combination. Or people can use grid X grid combination. Or people can use grid X combination. So in this methods, people can in different ways they can adapt this pick pen cipher method. So this format is converting plain text into cipher text, right? So similarly, let me just explain another text where I have cipher text. So I can just decrypt and I can extract the main text. So here I have the geometric structure. So this is called as a cipher text. So no one can understand anything out of these shapes unless they are aware of this cryptographic method. So one thing you have to be so clear. So whenever you don't find dots in your representation, then you can understand that my plain text will not belong to these two categories. It should belong only to these categories. If I am finding dots like this, then I can come to a conclusion that my plain text should belong to these categories. So that is the first thing you have to keep it in mind. So whether inclusion of dots or exclusion of dots. If a dot is being included, then you can identify your letters should belong to these categories. If there is no dot, then you can identify the letters are belonging to this category. Number 2, just by looking into the shape, you can come to a conclusion whether it belongs to grid or X. So whenever I fragment, whenever you identify this 4 fragmentation, automatically you can come to a conclusion this should belong to X. If not, then automatically it should be a fragmentation of grids. So what should be the fragmentation of grids? So this is the first one, this is the second one, and this is the third one. Similarly, you can just draw . So obviously by just looking into the grids you can understand the fragmentation. So now let me look into the given cipher text. So just by looking into this, I can just understand that this is the fragmentation of my X and it is pointing upward and without dot. So it should belong to this X, and this fragmentation is simply nothing but its substitution of S. Again, this is again the fragmentation of X pointing leftwards. So without dot, so it should be T. Now this is the fragmentation of grid. So you can just identify this shape. So this is a substitution of A. Now again I have a fragmentation of X along with the dot. Now this fragmentation is pointing rightward with the dot. So this is Y. So now I have done the part of a decryption process where I have obtained the plain text called stay. So now we have one more word. So by looking into it, I can identify it's a fragment of a grid and without dot. So it should belong to this grid, and upward is closed and downward is open. So it should be the last row. So it is simply nothing but, so it should be H. Now these two are again the fragmentation of grids, and they both have dots, which means they should belong to this grid. And immediately whenever it is closed at the top as well as at the bottom, then it should belong to the middle row. So it's out to open, so it should be this one, right? So now this is open at the left portion, so now this should be of this kind, so it is M. And whenever it's completely closed, it should be the centermost cell of the grid. and without dot obviously it should be E. So hence I have decrypted and just obtaining the message called stay home. I have another portion. So now I don't want to waste much time because they belong to same symbols. So I can just trace it as stay it again. So now again I have already decoded this symbol as yes. I have already decoded this symbol as A. So now again, as I mentioned already, this is a fragment of grid, and more importantly, when it is covered at the top as well as at the bottom, it should belong to the middle row, and it is open at the right end, so automatically you can identify this should be the symbol. So it is F. And finally, as I mentioned already, we have already decoded that when it is completely closed, it should be the centermost cell and there is no dot, so then this should be the symbol. So stay home, stay safe, it is the actual plain text. So this is the cipher text. We have done the decryption process and we have obtained the plain text message. So I hope you can understand. So just because of this nature, and you can just make it so easy. So fragmentation upward, downward, open left, open right, with dot, without dot. So you can just understand how X is being fragmented. Similarly, just by looking into the grid formats with dot and without dot, as we discussed already, it's one end is closed at the bottom, so which means it should open at the top, so it should belong to the first row. Here, open at the bottom, it should belong to the last row. Completely covered or covered at the top as well as covered at the bottom, it should belong to the middle row. So it's very easy. Let me repeat again. Open at the top, which means it should be the first row. Open at the bottom, it should be the last row. Closed at top as well as bottom, it should be the middle row. I am not speaking about columns, right? Again, coming to columns, if it is open at left, automatically it should be first column. Open at last, it should be the right, it should be the last column. So that's why this method is so easy. People even historical people even say that these methods are noticed even in children's storybook, so as to train them or make them involved in the method of cryptography or script writing, as this is so easy if deals with pictures, so even kids can understand this. So as I mentioned already, we have adapted grid x method. People can just use grid x method or grid x grid method or anyways. Few other people after Freemason, they have adopted similar kind of methods but in a more precise manner. So I can just explain that as well. So what they did is, they just fitted all the alphabets within a single grid of 9 cells. So each cell consisting of 3 alphabets, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. Similarly, they just clubbed all the consecutive 3 letters and they fitted in the consecutive cells. At last, there was one alphabet short because there should be 27 and we have only 26 alphabets. The last was fitted by ampersand. Right? So ampersand can be denoted as, for white space we can use ampersand. Again, let me get back into the earlier method, Julius Caesar's method. So, or even in this method, so whenever we have a white space, so it though I couldn't understand the word properly, I can at least understand how many letters are there in that particular word. So again, this may give a bit of clue. If at all in my sentence, somewhere if I am using a single letter word like I or A, though it is being converted into a cipher text using Julius Caesar's method, just by looking into a single letter word, people can understand that it should be either I or A. So out of 26 alphabets, only these 2 alphabets are used as a single letter words. So for A, if I am using D, and for I, if I am using L, just by looking into it, people can make sense and they can decode it very easily. They can apply the logic for all the other methods, all the other alphabets as well. So that is the biggest problem in Julius Caesar's method. So to avoid that, even for white spaces, we can use some sort of notations. So if for between any 2 words, if we have a white space, though people cannot sort out the word properly, they can at least understand how many letters are there in that word. Again, using some trial and error method, that there may be a possibility for them to sort out the word properly. So to avoid that, to make them to give them no clue about the letters of the word. So what people can do is, even for white spaces, people can use some sort of representations. So for white space, this ampersand symbol can be used. So since all these letters are being included in a single grid, what people did was, again within each cell, since they have 3 letters, they started using 1 dot, 2 dot and 3 dot. So in the similar manner as like we did, I am just having a word called hello. I can just explain the encryption process. So if I have to represent HELLO using this advanced method of Pigpen cipher for H, so I can just trace H. So H is here. So just by looking into the cell representation, I can just draw the geometric shape. Along with that, the position of H is second position, so I should represent with 2 dot. So this is so easy. Similarly, E. So E belongs to the second cell, first row, second cell. So which means it should be of this position, and again it is the second position alphabet, so it should be E. Similarly, L. So L is here, just its position is being traced from the cell, and it is the third alphabet in that particular cell, so 3 dots are being given there. So similarly, O is placed here, so the geometric representation of the cell is given, and O is again placed as a third alphabet in that particular cell, so 3 dots are given. So this method is a bit advanced method where people need not use grids and X's within a single grid. With this representation, people can use, as I mentioned already, I have just given a simple example called hello. If I am supposed to use this stay home example, there is a white space there. Instead of white space, I can just use this ampersand symbol. So if I have to connect this using this method probably, then I can just use this notation to represent the ampersand. So that's it, guys. I'm stopping my second session here. So though this method is so easy, this remains as so unique because all the rest of the other methods are using mono-alphabetic substitution cipher. This is one method where we are using geometric representations and dots, and this does not involve much time, because just by looking into the positional representations, we can just encrypt as well as decrypt. The only thing is, people has to be aware which sort of method they are using, either grid X grid method, or grid X method, or whatsoever they are using. So thank you very much for your patience listening. As an activity of this session, we can take up a very simple activity of just using Pigpen cipher method to encrypt your name into this geometrical cipher text. So thank you very much.